By the end of yesterday's lesson, you should have had a chord progression recorded as MIDI in your DAW. For the next couple days, we're going to flesh that out into a more fully formed idea. We're going to figure out the main instrumental pieces for our track and lay them down. I want to start by sharing a concept that I got from a book called The Mixing Engineer's Handbook. It's obviously a book about mixing, but I find that this concept is really helpful to carry through all the way to like the beginning of creating a piece of music. It has to do with the functions of all the sounds and making sure for most songs that your arrangement contains these elements. So these elements are the foundation, pads, rhythm, lead, and fills. The foundation is usually the bass and the drums, although it might have other instruments as well. It contains the major pulse of the song, so the beat that you feel and that you would count along to. As the bass is here, it also provides the harmonic grounding for the rest of the notes in the song. You can picture the rest of the song as being built on top of these elements. A pad is a long sustained sound, usually a note or a chord, though it could just be like an atmospheric sound as well. A synthesizer, an organ, a string section, a held guitar chord, or maybe a reverb tail even. All these things could serve as a pad. Pads are generally sort of in the background, filling out the empty space in a song. Rhythm is any instrument that plays off of the foundation, so it could be like a shaker or a tambourine, bongos in the background, a jangly guitar strumming. The rhythm element is used to add movement and excitement to a track. The lead is the part that you would sing along to, usually a vocal or a melodic instrument, though increasingly in electronic music we're seeing a lot more creative types of leads. This is the part that's generally going to occupy the listener's attention and probably be the most memorable. Fills occur in the spaces between the lead lines. They're there to keep interest in the places where it's natural for the main melody to take a break. Sometimes you can think of them as an answer to lead lines, so for instance in a lot of country and jazz music, during the breaks in the vocal, a little lead guitar will come in. In modern music we're seeing a lot of fills being made out of the main vocals, like it might get repeated and echoed or pitch shifted, and then of course there's things like drum fills, which just fill up some space that create some interest and they build towards the next part. The interesting thing about these elements is that while they have some tendencies to connect with certain instruments, there's also a lot of overlap. In a song, you might find that the guitar is like a pad in one part, but more rhythm in another, or a bass could obviously be the foundation, but it might also be a pad if it's holding really long sustained notes. In a genre like dubstep, the bass is sometimes the lead. So these aren't hard and fast rules, but I do find it really helpful to keep these elements in mind as I'm developing a song. If I ever get to a place where it doesn't quite feel right, usually I think about these elements and I realize something like my rhythm parts aren't doing enough, or I don't have any pads, or it's kind of bland because there are no fills in between my lead lines. For this part of the project, we're just going to focus on the first 4 elements. Fills will come later, but I want you to work towards building a solid foundation, rhythm, pads, and lead. The foundation and the lead are usually good pieces to get into place earlier on in the process, but every song is different and you can definitely do this in any order that feels right to you. Before I get into showing you practically how I would come up with these parts, I want to introduce you to one more big handy concept: tension and release. This is what makes music compelling. Release or resolution is your home base. This is where things feel stable and comfortable and settled. This is the root chord of your key. This is things hitting on the downbeat. It's instruments being more chill rather than having lots of dynamics and movement. Tension, on the other hand, is where you're away from home. It's where things feel unfinished and there's a pull to go back to home. So this is things like build-ups. This is harmonic complexity. It's also delayed gratification. Tension and release is how you use music to tell a story, just like you would tell any story. In comedy, the tension is when you're setting up a joke. You create this situation, the audience isn't sure where it's headed, and when the punchline comes, that's the release. All the information connects together in a satisfying way, and we laugh because we're back home. In a play, tension is the typical second act in a 3-act structure. Act 1 establishes the characters and situation, Act 2 creates a problem and tension, and Act 3 gives you the resolution. In books and movies and public speaking and so on, all forms of storytelling leverage tension and release. So in music, there's tension and release happening on all levels. It's happening like over the entire song and how you structure things and build things up and break them down, but it's also happening down to the details of like the space between 2 notes. So let's briefly look at harmonic and rhythmic tension because those are the 2 big axes of music, pitch and time, but almost every everything that we're covering in this course ties back to this concept of tension and release. So just keep that in your mind as we move forward, and I think you'll start to see just how much it comes into play everywhere. Have a look at the chord progression you made. This will have some level of tension and release based on the chord's relationship to each other and also to the root of the key that you're in. If you play it now, see if you can notice which chords seem to be more resolved and which ones are more tense. And you might also want to experiment with changing some of the chords if you want more tension or more resolution. Let's look at an example in C major. Let's say you use the random number generator to come up with a chord progression and it gave you 1, 4, 5, 1. In C major, that's C, F, G, C. That's a really vanilla chord progression. It might work for the track you're working on, but if you want to spice it up a little, here are a few different ways you could do that. I might change the root of the C chord to an E, because that's going to lead nicely into this F. And I might also use a suspension on the F chord. Instead of playing the A, I'm going to play a G. So changing the chord from this to this. Just has a little bit more tension to it because we don't have the full regular triad. So we're here now. The G I'm okay with. I'm feeling like it's fine. We don't have to change every single chord. And then going back to the C is fine, but I'm also thinking maybe it could be nice to go to the relative minor. Pretty much anything you play over a major will work over the relative minor, but it'll just be more tense because sad chords, there's more tension there than a nice happy chord. So if we do that, then our full progression is... which I think is a lot nicer than our original. And because all the new chords are directly related to the ones that I changed them from, if we already had a melody on top of this, it would still fit over it. So those are 3 ways to introduce some more harmonic tension: using a bass note that's not the root note of the chord, using a different form of a chord rather than the plain old triad root, third, fifth. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And then the third way, of course, is using the relative minor of a major chord. Let's talk about that F chord again quickly. I changed the A in the F chord to a G. So this became this. And that's what's called a suspension. And typically suspensions happen by replacing the third of a chord with either the second or the fourth. So the third of an F chord is an A, and the second is a G, and the fourth is a B flat. That would be the next note up in the scale. So if we wanted to do a suspended fourth, we'd go here. And you hear how nicely that resolves to the third. And similarly, a suspended second going to a third is a really nice resolution. Another layer of harmonic tension is how the lead interacts with the chord progression. The most resolved melodies will have lots of notes that are in the chords that are playing at the same time, while the most tense melodies will have notes that are outside of the current chord, or maybe even outside of the current key. The lowest note in a chord supports the rest of it, which is why most of the time the bass plays the root note of a chord. But as you saw me just demonstrate, sometimes it's nice to play another note, usually from the chord, but sometimes it could be outside the chord as well. Also, basses will often play fills, so they'll completely leave the root note of a chord. They might be playing the root for a while, then they'll go off and do some fun little line before hitting the next chord's root note right when the chord changes. So let's also go over the basics of rhythmic tension. This is generally a function of how far away you are from an expected beat. So if you're counting along with a song, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 1 is the strongest and therefore the least tense place to put something. It's very expected, it's very predictable. A lot of song sections will start on 1s, a lot of chord changes will happen on 1s because those are the big fundamental pieces that listeners need to be able to hang on to. After the 1, the 3 is the most stable beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like counting along in halftime. The 2 and the 4 land at these wonderful places where they're strong enough to follow easily, but weak enough that you can juxtapose them against the stronger 1 and 3 beats. So that's why a lot of songs put a snare or a clap on 2 and 4. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just kind of pushes things along. So as you continue to subdivide and accentuate weaker beats by putting notes or drum hits or chord changes on them, that's how you start to introduce more rhythmic tension. The term for that kind of unexpectedness in rhythm is syncopation. So if you have a really stable, boring beat, it might be like 1, 2, 3, 4. All those accents are happening right on beat. It's not very interesting. If you want to introduce a little bit of tension, you would introduce a little bit of syncopation and play some of the offbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you examine just the rhythm of a melody that you like, you'll probably find that it has a mix of strong and weak beats, and actually it'll likely have more weak beats than strong beats because that's just more interesting to our ears in a lead line. A lot of kids' music is simpler, it just has stuff on the beats because can't have a lot of syncopation for kids, you know? They don't have real brains yet. Let's mess around with Three Blind Mice, for example. Three blind mice, see how they run. See how they run. Everything's on beat. If I move just one note to an offbeat, it gets way more interesting. Three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. We can move another note offbeat. Three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. It's like already a lot more of a kind of modern pop melody. Na, na, na. Na, na, na. Yeah. So when you're writing music, when you're coming up with your parts, on some level, whether consciously or not, you're always deciding how much tension you want to create the feeling that you're after. That's it for theory and concepts for today. Let's get into making some music. So we are building on that chord progression we came up with. We're going to flesh out this first idea, and remember, we're thinking about those elements, the foundation, the pads, the rhythm, and the lead. I'm going to be using a lot of sounds from Complete Start, which again is a free library that comes from Native Instruments. Mine might look a little bit different from yours if you use it because I do have the full version of Complete, but all the sounds I'm using in it are ones that are from their free collection. I'm going to type in Neon Drive because I'm feeling like I want to go in sort of an 80s inspired direction with this track, and I know that this pack has those kinds of sounds. Depending on what you want to make and how familiar you are with your own sounds, this might be a more involved process for you of kind of trying different things out and seeing what you like, but definitely I feel most producers get to this point where they just have this library built up in their brain and they know exactly where they want to reach when they have a particular kind of idea. Complete actually makes it really easy to look through sounds because they have all these demos that are made with the sounds before you even load them up that you can hear. Yeah, I might start with that one, Kali Knights Kit, it's called. Yeah, normally I would tweak these sounds more, but we're gonna cover that in a future project. So these are close enough to what I want for my idea. I'm gonna use them as is. I wanna do a pretty basic beat that kind of goes like this. And you can record yourself playing your drums in, or you can draw them in with MIDI. In this case, I'm gonna draw them in because it's gotta be kind of like a precise, robotic drum machine sort of feel. So I'm gonna put a hi-hat on every 16th note. I'm just using the duplicate command there. Then I'm gonna draw a kick on every quarter note, snare on 2 and 4, and I'm also gonna put a clap to play along with the snares. So right here we've got our beat. This is both foundation and rhythm. The foundation is the kicks and the snares and the claps, and the rhythm is the hi-hat. So these are the big standard elements of a drum kit. It's kind of taken from like a live drum kit, but it doesn't even have most of that stuff, the cymbals and the toms. It's kick, snare, hi-hat. Kick and snare are like the foundation of so many different genres of music, and then the hi-hat is there to add a bit of rhythm, to make that excitement happen and to keep time. And as you get familiar with different kinds of rhythms and different genres, you'll understand what you can do with drums to create certain feels. So, I mean, I could erase this and create something else that would be like more dance hall-y. So that's another kind of kick snare foundation. If I wanted to, we could get rid of that and we could create something that's more like drum and bassy. And then these sounds wouldn't quite work for a drum and bass track, so I would switch those out if I was gonna go in that direction. But I think you can see from just changing the pattern that the drums are playing how different of a feel you can create. So let's go back to our original beat that I wanted programmed. I could probably just press, you know, undo a bunch of times, but actually I think it's just as fast for me to program it back in. I'm using a lot of commands that would be common to a lot of MIDI editors, copy and paste, using the arrow keys to move notes around, and then also making selections of a certain duration in time, knowing what I need to paste to so that I can paste the rhythm that I want without having to reposition the notes after. Getting familiar with all these commands combined with all my music theory knowledge, you know, all the rhythms that I know need to happen here, that's how I'm able to make these things happen really fast. That's a good drum foundation. I'm gonna keep on going with the foundation and add a bass. So for the bass, I'm gonna use Helm, which is a cross-platform free synthesizer. I'll link it in the lesson notes. Let's just scroll through some presets and see what kind of sounds we can get. Oh, that's so good. That's great for my little 80s vibe that I want. I'm picturing kind of like a 16th note plucky bass line, you know? And again, depending on the kind of music you want to make, it might make more sense to play or to program your bass. If you don't have an idea for a part, definitely jam around. It's way better being hands-on than trying to draw stuff. And remember that your bass line is very connected to your chord progression, so it almost always makes sense to start with the root notes of the chords, and then you can go from there and see if there's other flavors you want to try. Sometimes I feel like I can program music faster than I can play it, because I know I want these bass lines to do 16ths. I know what my chord progression is, so I can copy that to the next note, to the next note, to the next note, copy that whole thing, and then just change what the root notes are that are different in the next bar. All right, it's doing its job fine, but I don't think it's quite right. It feels a little bit bland, and since I've filled up all the space with notes, there's a note on every single 16th beat, my options are to change some of the notes or to take away some of the notes. So my first idea would be to delete the notes in the second halves of the bar where the strings also stop playing. And now I might change some of these root notes. I think that G is a little bit too obvious. I'm gonna make that a B, also a note from that chord, but it's right below the C, which is the next chord. So we're gonna have nice movement with the bass leading from that B to the C. I might make these notes an octave higher. And then actually have some of these notes be a G, because then we kind of start at a C, we move away from it, we go through our G and our B, and it's all kind of a nice movement in the same direction back to the C. I don't quite like that. I'm just gonna play with this. This will be dun, 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 dun. And so now that I've been experimenting with that, I'm hearing a rhythm that could maybe carry over to the rest of our bass line. So if we kind of mimic that, but with the different chord notes. I'm still not entirely sold on this bass line, so I'm gonna move that over to the side for now and just try playing some stuff along and see what I like. Yeah, I'm feeling this a lot more. So as you can see, right when I got hands-on with it, I'm just automatically doing some stuff that's a bit more syncopated, a bit more funky, a bit more fun. Initially, I thought that what I wanted was that kind of 16th note chugging along sort of bass line, but I'm finding that this works a lot better. I'm actually feeling like I want the tempo of the song to be a little bit faster because of this. Yeah, just a few BPM faster works. So if we look at what I'm doing here, it's a syncopated rhythm, and I'm playing the root notes of the chords most of the time. The rhythm repeats each bar, but it changes up in the last beat, maybe beat and a half before each chord change. Both the rhythm changes and the notes will go outside of the root. This is an example of the kind of bass fills that I mentioned earlier. And if you look at how the fills work, they're in some way leading to the next chord in the progression. So we've got the E flat bringing us from the C to the F. Before going from the F to the G, I jump back down to the E flat. It's the tiniest little repeat of a motif there. And then to go from the G chord to the C chord in the bass, I'm going G, B, C, and it's the high octave of the C, and that high octave then jumps down to the low octave. And this was just stuff that I kind of improvised and felt out because I know my music theory, I know this chord progression I'm working with, I know the scale that I'll be dealing with here. So I know now what I want to do with my bass line on my track, but let me go over a few common ways to come up with bass lines that could be helpful for you. You could kind of think of these as algorithms that might apply in different situations. So the easiest, most basic place to start is to use the bass as both foundation and pad and just hold the root notes of the chords. The next step up from that would be to line up those bass root notes with what your drums are doing, maybe with a couple extra offbeat notes. So you can see there, I've got a bass coming in with every kick and snare other than beat 2, and I have one extra little note leading into the 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another easy rhythm to do is all offbeats. Similar vibe to that, the disco algorithm I'll call it, you just do octaves. There's also an algorithm that's like root note on the downbeat, bunch of other fun fills leading into root note on the next downbeat. Now that's obviously a bit more advanced because you need to be more comfortable with the scales that you're in and playing on the keyboard, but you can start to introduce some of that feel by using passing notes with any of the simpler algorithms. So for example, with the pad, on the beat before each chord change, I'm going to insert one note that's beside what the root note of the next chord is. And we could try this with the pattern that lined up with most of the drum beats. And maybe you noticed there I did a couple things that were a little different. I played an F sharp in between the F and the G. That F sharp is not in our scale, but it's a nice note right in between F and G, which is the chord change that we're making, so it works well. It's some of that tension and release out of the key, but perfectly bringing us into the next chord. And then also from the G, I went to E flat and then to C. So before I had said to use a note from the scale that's right beside the next chord, but you could also use a note from the scale that's a part of the next chord. The C minor chord is C, E flat, G, so it's really easy to precede it with an E flat or a G. All right, so now I am going to record my bass line. Gonna delete this old idea, don't need that, and try this out. So now I'm going to quantize this, and what that does is it moves each of the notes to the beat that they're closest to, like perfectly on beat, and you can set the resolution of the grid for that. You can sometimes quantize the end of the note as well, which I'm not going to do. So I'm going to choose 16th notes because that is the fastest resolution of note that I was playing. Quantize it 100%, and now it'll be perfectly tight on. This is something that you might want for certain songs, you might not want it for others. It all depends on the feel that you're after. And also, of course, if you played way off beat, quantization might move the note to the wrong beat, so you'll have to just edit that over in the MIDI. Now, if you watch my YouTube videos, I hope you're catching that there is a lot more happening here. I'm trying out different ideas. I'm really iterating on stuff a lot. I'm throwing things away, changing the tempo of my project. In my YouTube videos, I do things really quickly. I try to keep them snappy and flowing, show the fun parts. I don't want to waste people's time showing a bunch of ideas that didn't work. But I think it's good for you to see that I'm trying a lot of different stuff out. There's a lot of different ideas and some fit better than others. So don't be afraid if things aren't working out right away. Definitely keep at it, try different things, and hopefully I'm giving you a lot of the tools and insight that you need to know how to approach it from a lot of different angles. I actually want to make one little change to my bass line here. This part, just want a bit more movement to it, and I know exactly what I want to hear. I'm just gonna draw it in. Oops, I got one of these wrong. And we'll have to get the velocities up. Again, I could record that in, quantize it, or I could draw it in, edit it slightly. Sometimes one's faster than the other, sometimes they take about the same amount of time. Now I have a bass line where I'm happy with every part of it. So we've got pads, that's the strings. We've got the bass and the kick and snare doing foundation. The bass is also kind of a rhythm part because it's very syncopated, and then the hi-hats are doing some rhythm. So we are missing a lead. So let's pull up another instance of complete. Gonna label this track lead. So I'm gonna load up Analog Dreams. It's also from the Complete Start free collection. I know it has a lot of good 80s sounds in it. Let's go. Could that work? So I'm just jamming along here with the C minor scale. I found a little thing that I like that is playing with that idea of suspensions that we kind of touched on before. We've got a lot of little phrases that start with a note outside of the chord and then resolve to a note that is in the chord. It's not always the case, but it is with most of them. And there's also an extremely consistent rhythm to everything I'm playing. Da-da, 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 da-da. Just over and over again. That's probably not what I would want if this was a lead part. It sounds like more of an accompanying thing if that's all it does. But maybe if it were a lead thing, it would do that rhythmic figure for a little bit and then do something else and then come back to it and then do something else. Let's play with that idea. You know what, I'm gonna tuck that idea away. I think I need to try a different approach because this is feeling more like an accompaniment line than a lead line. Might file this one under rhythm. Try a different sound. Kind of like what some of that is doing, but I want it to be on a bell sound. Maybe that could work. Let's put a bunch of reverb on it. Really want this to be dreamy. Maybe play it in octaves. It's pretty close, and I'm wanting to stick with these free sounds and just focus on the bigger picture, so I'm not going to do a whole bunch of tweaking, but that's a nice plucky thing. It's not quite a chime, it's more of a plucked string maybe, but for the purposes of this, I think it'll work. So let's keep jamming. Maybe we actually want this as like a lead. It doesn't sound quite right, but I'm just getting the shape of the melody down, and now I'm gonna go in the MIDI editor and refine it. First we'll quantize. Here's the first part where I'm not feeling it. I think it wants to go lower. So I'm just using chord notes from G major, which is the chord that's playing right there. Oh, but then it goes back to a C there, so that should be a note from C. Shorten that note, and then here. This note I'm not feeling because it's the same as the one in the same position in the bar before, so... Maybe the one before needs to go up, but then it'll be higher than the one before that. Actually, what we could do here is get out of this rhythmic motif. So if you look at this melody, we have the same rhythmic figure repeated 6 times. The notes are a little bit different each time, but it's the exact same rhythm. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. That's something that's really helpful in a lead line, is these small pockets of repeated figures within the larger melody. At the same time, it'll get boring if it just repeats and repeats and repeats, so sometimes you want to change it up, and typically, the most common place to change it up would be towards the end, after people have already got their expectations set up with what could happen. In a way, we have a repeat happening on a more macro level as well, too, because we have this group of 3, and we have this group of 3. So there's a lot of kind of embedded repetition within this melody. What I want to do is change this last figure to something a little bit different, a little more interesting. All right, I am hearing one idea. We're gonna delay gratification a bit. I'm gonna hold this note a bit longer, and then we're still gonna end in the same place here, but these are gonna scooch over. And actually, we're gonna remove one. And the notes that I wanted to hear were do 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 do, something like that. You wanted to work over the G chord. Maybe it could just be a G. Seems a bit too low. But maybe we just want the melody to resolve to a C here. So here's a situation where now that I'm coming up with the melodies, I might want to change my chord progression to fit the melody. So there is this interplay between your chords affecting your melody and your melody affecting your chords. And that is what songwriting is all about. So let's change that G chord to a C minor. And then the one before it, was a suspension. So maybe we want to either change that to a G chord, or what I think I want to do, keep it, but insert another G chord that is resolved for a G chord, and have that resolve to the C minor. I think it's not really working because that string sound swells so much, it's not really intelligible what chord it is immediately. So I'm just going to go with plan A, get rid of the suspended chord. That is just gonna be a G, or a G7 actually in this case. So, second half of our melody is... Oh, sorry, I gotta change the bass line. So let's give our melody a listen now. Now, I'm still not feeling this section. I think it deviates too far from the motif that we have here. Just gonna move those notes slightly closer together to other notes that are within the chords. It's not quite working. Actually, I think what I want to try is the same change up in rhythm that we did on the second repeat. That's nicer. And now I'm gonna change the end of the second repeat to something different. And I think just to maintain some more of the tension, instead of going back to that C minor chord as our last chord, I am actually gonna hold on to what I was doing before, the G sus to the G7. Change the bass line back. And what are we gonna do with this melody? Na, na, na. Na, na, na. I think I have a fun idea. I came up with this by singing, which is another great natural way to come up with melodies. You can play, you can draw, but there's nothing more connected to your music making soul than your voice. So I definitely recommend, if you're stuck somewhere, just try and like even if it's with a beat or something, it doesn't have to be with a melody, make the music with your mouth, with your body. You feel it so much more that way. So I just sung a little melodic thing. Let's see if we can remember it first of all, and then get it in there. Something like that. So it actually is the same rhythm, but now instead of continuing that downward movement, I've gone and scooped back up a little bit and then come down just a tiny bit. And that's another great thing to note about melodies. They kind of hook around. Like if you've been going up for a while, you're gonna come down. If you made a big jump down, your next note probably is gonna be up. Not a strict rule by any means, but definitely a tendency. Melodic tendencies. I've taken a one-day break from this track. Breaks are really good to have. You come back to a piece with fresh ears. The more you do music production, the shorter the breaks can be while still being effective. Sometimes just going to have lunch for an hour is enough to come back with your ears reset and hearing things a little bit more objectively. I've also just been thinking about this track and brainstorming some of the possibilities, so now that I have it open in front of me, I'm going to listen to it purposefully with some of those ideas in mind, as well as just seeing how it hits me, you know, seeing if anything feels different, better, or worse than before when I was working on it, and seeing if any new ideas come up as well. Okay, so definitely confirmed a few of the things that I was thinking, and I have some ideas of what I want to try right now. First of all, the drums are not doing it for me, both the sounds and the hi-hat pattern. I actually think I want to remove every other hi-hat. Yeah, that's gonna be closer to what I want. Also, it's just too slow. That's too fast. Let's hang out there, 99 BPM. Now, as far as the drum sounds, what I'm feeling is that the clap and snare is a little too thin. I think the clap is a lot louder than the snare now, so I'm gonna bring the snare up. And that feels good to me, but I'm also feeling like I'm gonna shift the clap over a bit. So instead of the transient of the clap coming through, we get more of the fatter punch of the snare, and then we still have the clap there. And it's also a very human thing for claps to not be perfectly on beat. So this is definitely a pretty regular trick that I go to, is pushing the claps a little bit back, sometimes even a little bit forward, but it's little details like that that make your drum groove feel a little bit more alive and give it a bit more character. I also might remove the kicks on 2 and 4. Yeah, I like that more. That's a bit more what a human would play, having the kick and snare alternate rather than ever hitting on the exact same beat. Kicks and snares happening together is definitely a lot more of a house or EDM kind of thing. The other thing that I was thinking of changing, and that listening through this I've decided I definitely do want to change, is this lead sound. I've been flip-flopping about this, but I decided I do want that to be a bell and not that lead. Let's see if we can find that bell sound. It was somewhere over here. I'm gonna add reverb to that so that it's still plucky, but there's a tail to it. Now, one other thing I want to do to this sound, because it's plucky, maybe kind of a bell, kind of a string, I'm gonna double it with an octave above. I just selected all the notes, copied them, shifted them an octave up, and I'm also gonna move the octave up copy slightly over. So we get that little extra plink rather than them playing at the same time. And that again is just another humanizing element. It's something that like a piano player would do, kind of rocking their hand between the two notes just to get a little bit of a different and more interesting articulation than both notes hitting at once. All right, that lead is sticking out a little bit now. I'm gonna turn it down. Yeah, that feels a bit better. Now, here's the other thing that I'm thinking. I want to remove the lead and the strings right now for a second. Because I'm feeling like the drum and bass parts work so well together as kind of a funky thing, and I think I want to go in that direction. We started the track with these string chords. They were like beautiful and orchestral, but as things have developed and, you know, I sped up the track, I think we're in quite different territory right now. Let's actually move these drum and bass parts over, see what the strings and lead bell things sound like together. I still really like that, but I feel like these are almost two separate things. They might become separate songs, or I feel like this could be a cool orchestral intro, but then the beat kicks in and you find out, oh, this is actually like a funky jam. The drums and the bass are the real direction that I want to pursue, and what I want to talk about right now is vision. At some point in the creation of any song, or at least any song you want to finish, you need to develop and commit to a vision. Sometimes you might be really lucky, you'll have inspiration strike, and that's like having a vision right from the get-go. You have this idea, you know what it wants to be, and you just have to execute it. But not all songs are started that way. In fact, I'd say most are not started that way. Most come from jamming around, they come from trying a few different things out that maybe you don't like, and then you find one that you do, but you still have to kind of explore to eventually get to a vision. And it might happen really early on in the process, or sometimes it might just not happen. I have stuff that's been sitting around for months or years, and it's just like, it doesn't know what it wants to be. I don't know where I want to take it. I hold out hope that one day I'll find a vision for those little bits and pieces, but for now they're just that, little bits and pieces, odds and ends. So you need that vision, that compass, that guiding light at some point in the creation of the song that is going to help you to funnel all of your decision making into a direction. And that's not to say that there won't be more jamming and experimentation and playing around as you continue to develop the song, but at least you start to hone in on what the final product should be. Now, because we're doing a course, we have limited time, so I'm gonna ask you, as you're working on the project after this lesson, even if you don't have some incredible, amazing vision for your song, see if you can find some general direction that you can commit to, because that's just gonna make things easier, it's gonna narrow down your options, and you're gonna spend more time creating and less time having existential crises. So coming back to this track, I've taken a couple steps back because I've separated it out into this maybe intro and this kind of main funky groove. This groove is lacking some of our 4 elements that we were aiming for in this lesson. It's just drums and bass. It's definitely a good foundation. The bass is doing a bit of rhythmic stuff, but I think it could definitely use more. And then it obviously doesn't have pads or a lead. So let's see how we can develop this now. The first thing that I'm feeling is a little bit more rhythm, something kind of stabby. And I'm just gonna stick with Analog Dreams because it's been working so well for us. Let's look around for a preset. Oh, maybe? I think we could maybe find something better. Ooh, yeah, that's plucky. That's closer to what I'm thinking. Kind of like this rhythm. It lines up with the bass rhythm sometimes, but it also deviates sometimes, so it's playful, it's fun. Gonna keep trying stuff out with this. Okay, I actually have an idea now where the rhythm part might also be the melody part. I told you there was some overlap sometimes. But as I was messing around with these chord shapes and occasionally moving some of the notes around, it felt like maybe the top note could kind of become the melody, playing along with the rest of the stabby stuff that's just doing chords. So I had the start of one idea that was like, but I actually think I want to simplify that even further, keep the melody the same on top even though the chord changes. Yeah, it kind of works over all the chords. I think the 4th time it'll have to do something different, both melodically and rhythmically, but it kind of works repetitively. All right, let's record it. And that last part, I was just kind of vibing it out. I didn't really have a plan for it. I had a feeling that I was going for, but it's definitely not the final thing that I want. That said, MIDI is very easy to edit. My keyboard skills aren't always the greatest, so if I'm just messing around with an idea, if I can like kind of get the rhythm of it out, the expression of it out, I'll change around the notes later. So maybe that's good news for you if you're not a keyboard player, but let's see what we can do with this thing I just put down. So first of all, I am gonna quantize everything just because we are dealing with a more electronic sort of track, so I want everything to be tighter. Now that's a little bit too straight ahead, so I'm gonna add some swing in, and this is something that might not be possible in all programs, but essentially this is a very human feeling way to play. Sometimes you want that straight ahead kind of very precise robotic feel, and sometimes you want a bit of shuffle, you want a bit of swing. People call it different things. Basically what it comes down to is if you remember the counting system that we went over in the theory lesson, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, those E's and those ands, the little offbeats, every other note is another way of thinking about it, are slightly late. The 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, those are still straight ahead, but the ones in between are a little bit shuffly. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4, that's so shuffled, but hopefully illustrates my point. Now some programs have ways to do this automatically, but my preference is actually to do it by hand because then you have more fine control over exactly the placement of each one. Sometimes you want some of them to be pushed a little further than others. So I'm gonna highlight all the notes that are supposed to be shuffled and then just nudge them a little bit. So I'm turning off the grid in my MIDI so that I can just use my arrow keys and push them around a little bit. Okay, that's where I want it, and now that's making me realize that my bass also is in want of a bit of that shuffle. So let's find the offbeat notes there. That feels good. These stabs still feel a little loud. I'm turning them down a bit. As you can see, I do a little bit of mixing as I go. More on that in a future lesson. Well, let's go back to what we were doing. I was gonna change this final bit of rhythm slash melody. Da, 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 da. That second note I want to be different. I'm just gonna sing it out. What would be a fun thing to put here? Da, 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 da. I do like how it ends. Maybe the beginning of it needs to be different. Da, da, da. Yeah. Da, da, da. Da, da, da. Yeah, that's what I want. And then I also want some of the chord notes to not be on the melody notes. I think. Let's try it. Like there. That one could be earlier. Give it our shuffle. Yeah, now the earlier part of the bar is feeling a bit naked, so let's add another one of those chords somewhere. Does this spot make sense? Or this one? Yeah, I think I want to fill out the end of it with some inversions. Ooh, yeah. One more here. That melody could have more notes in it. Da, 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 da. And maybe take away some of the chords now. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Let's listen to this whole thing now. That first chord of the last bar is not feeling full. Yeah, it was missing a little something in that part of the register, because like we've had that this whole time, and then right here before, you know, I had moved the chord lower for some variation, but it still felt like it wanted just that little that little bit there. Now, let's just copy paste this into the second half of our chord progression and create the variations that are necessary to both keep interest and also follow along with the chords that are different. You know what? I think the melody needs to be different here. I'm hearing like a do 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 do. And also this chord is playing a C minor, but it should be an A flat. So we're gonna change that G to an A flat. And the rest of the notes are shared between C minor and A flat, so that should work now. And I wanna keep that same melody motif happening, so. Na, 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 na. And yeah, we can go back to the first one there. Some familiarity could be good there. And then all that's got to change because we're on a completely different chord. Actually, I'm hearing something else. We're gonna put bigger chords there doing the kind of normal rhythm. These chords are gonna be stacked even bigger. Maybe I'll just copy them and add an octave up. No, what I'm gonna do is have the melody just keep going up. I'm after a build here, so that's how we're gonna do it. That one should go. Na, na. Yeah, so what I've done here is have each chord have one additional note to build it up. Now I want this final melody to also reflect this little bass note here, which is resolving a bit early. We're on a G chord and it's playing a B and then right at the end, C. So it's going from a note that's in G to a note that's in C just slightly before we actually go back to that C minor chord. So that helps a little bit with that chord change, but of course then it makes me want to mirror it in our little rhythm melody part here. Copy that chord and then just adjust it to be, I guess, a C minor chord so that it just perfectly matches. Da, da. Da, da, da. There you go. Now, if music theory is new to you, what I just did here is gonna take you way longer. You know, I'm here auditioning one note at a time, knowing that I wanna change a chord into another chord, hearing with each note how far it is from the closest note in that chord that I want it to be, and just automatically knowing how far I need to move it to get there. This is where the experience and the practice comes in. This is where it really pays off, being able to execute your ideas really quickly. I'll give you another example as I complete the idea that I had here. I wanna add a new part. It's a little bit of a lead line that would go on top of this right at the end of the phrase here. It'd be like, I hear that as a high synth melody. It's one of those ideas that just sprung into my mind fully formed. Because of the knowledge and experience that I have with music theory, I already know how to play that on the keyboard. Now, of course, we don't all have that ability, but I do want you to get there. In the meantime, I'll show you how you can start figuring out those ideas that you have. If you've got melodies or bass lines that you have in your head and you don't know how to play them yet, this is how you got to figure them out. First, so you don't lose it, you're going to drive it into your mind. You're going to remember what it is, what it feels like, what it sounds like. Maybe you've been there before where you're trying to figure out an idea, it's taking you a while, or you have to go get your instrument out, whatever it is, and then by the time you're there working it out, you've actually already lost it. I don't want that to happen to you. I want you to memorize the idea when it comes to you before you do anything else. So I have a little melody idea here. If I was taking this approach, I would just keep singing it to myself. Da da da. Da 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 da. I'll whole bunch of times until you really feel like you've internalized that. Maybe if you can, make a note of the rhythm using our rhythmic notation that we went over in the music theory lesson. You could also kind of draw out the arc of the melody, because even if you don't know the exact notes, you can probably tell which ones are going higher or lower from the previous one. So do everything you can to memorize that melodic idea before you start trying to figure it out. When you get to the stage that you're ready to figure out, then it's just one by one determining what each of the notes are. Because my melody idea goes with this track that I've already been working on, I can probably guess that all the notes are gonna be part of the key that I'm in, which is C minor. So let's only look at notes from C minor. It's just 7 notes. So what was my idea? Na 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 na. I'm gonna sing that first note and gonna play keys from C minor until we find what it is. Na. We lucked out. First note's a C. Great. Second note. Na na. So I can hear that it's lower than the C, so let's play that C and then just walk our way down the C minor scale until we find our second note. Na na. There it is, it's a G. So our third note is na na na. It's higher than a G. Let's walk up from that G. Na. It's a B flat. And by the way, it might be a good idea for you to be marking these note names down as a way to remember them as well. Depending on your experience or the way you learn, maybe it'll be enough for you to just kind of remember the distances of the notes or the shape that your hands are making or the way that it feels to play them. But of course, can't hurt to also just write it down. Na 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 na. Fourth note in my idea moves down from the third note, so na 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 na. It's just one note down in C minor. Na 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 na. Again, moving down. Na 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 na. Now again, if you're new, this method will still probably take you a little bit longer than how I just demonstrated it here, but it's a great way to figure out your ideas. This is what I did before I was fully comfortable in my music theory knowledge. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it, and one day you might surprise yourself and find that you don't actually need to do this, and you are in that zone where you already know how to play something that you hear in your head. So let me lay this down in our project now. Gonna add a new MIDI track. Gonna throw in another Analog Dreams because it's just an easy sound palette to deal with. I know what to expect. Yeah, that'll do for now. Okay, it's very basic, gonna fine tune that later, but that's for another lesson. I've got the skeleton of my first idea here now. I want you to go and make yours. Your homework is gonna be to try to apply some of these concepts as you're fleshing out your idea. Remember, you're at least just aiming for a foundation, pads, rhythm, and a lead part. I'll give you some bullet points on all of the tips and techniques that I talked about in this video so you can refer to that, but also come back to this video if you need a more in-depth refresher on anything. Have fun!